Everything to do with pop culture has been important to me. I think it's kind of a driving force for me, whether it's in art or music or fashion. I really like pop life because it I don't know, it inspires me. It keeps me in the moment because pop is very current. It's always very current. I mean, yeah, there's old pop art, but living a pop life, you see the world differently. You appreciate things. You don't let them pass by. Pop art just was something that we had fun with, that we enjoyed, that we took for granted, but we also accepted it as something being very important. We did a lot of mixing, but it gave us a feeling that we were in the moment, and pop art is nothing if it isn't in the moment. It's very much in the moment. In fact, someone who appreciates pop art, not just pop art as something that you can buy, not just that way, but pop art like before it's happening. Something you see that you say, wow, that is really something I love. I adored Andy. He was fabulous. We had the best time. And we really, wherever we went, we had fun. You know, and when people would see us together, I think we brought a lot of feeling that okay, you were in the right party. I would just say blah, 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 to Andy, and he'd go, gee, and wow, and oh, and basically he'd use those words and maybe say taxi at the end of the night. Just to be part of something. But he didn't need to speak sometimes. He was just communicating, just being around us. Because I think that you can't really judge Andy by one piece. Some artists you can. I would say Basquiat you can judge by one piece. But Andy, I don't think you can. I think you need to see like as much of the body of work as you can. And then you really understand the evolution of what he's done. And I don't mean that when he was designing shoes. I mean, if you see the real evolution of what he's done in pop art, and you see a general look of the collection, you really say, wow, this is a very important. I think the dangerous part with pop art is pretentiousness of pop art. I think that that we're dealing with something that's popular, meaning available and part of how we live and what we're living in. This can be elegant and elite and expensive. There's no problem with that. But it also has to be appreciated. I think that popular culture in fashion, music, and art really gives us a kind of a sparkle in our life. It gives us the glamour, it gives us a sparkle, and if some call it kitsch, I think they're off on that. I think that there's a playfulness in life that art needs to be able to give you. It shouldn't always make you sad. If there's a joy and there's a wink in what we do, the kind of pop art that attracts me, and I think attracts all of us.
Pop art was born in the middle of the 1950s in England. It is said to have been the child of the new, young, rebellious artists. Most modern art seems to be quite disruptive, not following any rules or necessarily fitting into any genre. The expression pop art comes from popular, so basically the pop art artists are inspired by whatever is commercial and in advertisements at the moment. For example, Andy Warhol's Campbell soup cans. The original purpose of the series was to promote the soup for the factory company Campbell. Pop art was born with American pop culture. The purpose of the art genre is to portray something or someone in an edgy and unique way. The first artists to create pieces of pop art were artists such as Andy Warhol, Jasper Johns, and Ravel and Rauschenberg. The point was for the subject of the art to be identifiable, as the person or object would be very famous or commercial, such as with Warhol's colorful Marilyn Monroe, Brigitte Bardot, Mao Zedong, and James Dean portraits. Still now, artists copy this concept. Pop artist Russell Young still now does the same as Warhol and creates colorful portraits of icons. Pop art is actually a very superficial and materialistic genre of art. It promotes consumer goods, reflecting whatever is currently popular in the media. There are so many fascinating factors that have provoked artists like Andy Warhol to create world-famous pieces like the Campbell's Soup Can series. However, there's actually also a purpose behind them that is deep and not superficial. People so often think that pop art is just meant to be decorative. However, in pop art actually represents so many important necessities in everybody's daily life. Andy Warhol was probably the most influential pop art artist of all times. Still now, over 2 decades after his death, he is known as the Prince of Pop. He is most famous for his Campbell's Soup paintings, but created many other works. Born Andrew Warhola, Warhol was born on the 6th of August 1928. He grew up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania with his parents, who both had migrated to America from Czechoslovakia, and his 2 older brothers. As a child, Warhol took a large interest in art already, as he drew and enjoyed creating collages. Warhol did not have an easy childhood. While visiting elementary school, Warhol suffered from St. Vitus's disease, which forced Warhol to spend many months in bed resting. Andy Warhol had very little confidence and was not accepted by his classmates, due to him being very eccentric as well as having big chorea outbreaks on his face. Even in high school, Warhol continued to be very shy and an outsider. He took art classes at the Carnegie Museum and at school, and always carried around a sketchbook with him. In 1949, Warhol majored in pictorial design from the Carnegie Institute of Technology. While he attended college, Warhol discovered the blotted line technique, which was taping 2 blank papers together and drawing ink on one of the pages. Then he would press the still wet ink on the next page, which created an asymmetrical pattern of lines, which he would then color with watercolor. In 1950, Andy Warhol moved to New York. He became known very quickly for his blotted line technique and created advertisements for many companies. For example, his shoe ads for I. Miller or his Christmas cards for Tiffany's. In around 1960, Warhol experimented with pop art. He wanted to earn a reputation in pop art for himself, so he changed his style and turned to painting canvas. Later on, he began to create comic strips and his legendary Coke bottles. In 1962, Andy Warhol had his first exhibition in Los Angeles at the Ferris Gallery, where his Campbell's Soup canvases were displayed and sold them for $1,000 each. Warhol discovered that year that he could not paint fast enough on canvas, so the artist switched to silk screening, which was the technique he used for the rest of his career as an artist. He instantly began creating paintings of celebrities, of which he painted an especially large collection of Marilyn Monroe. Warhol also made movies. He made almost 60 between the years of 1963 to 1968. His movies were considered quite bizarre, especially Sleep, which was a film of a man sleeping for 5 hours. On the 3rd of July 1968, Valerie Solanas shot Andy Warhol in the chest. She was very upset with him and just walked into Warhol's studio, which was known as the Factory. Although he was pronounced dead, the doctors managed to bring him back to life by massaging his heart. Warhol lived but spent a long time recovering. Warhol continued to paint during the 70s and 80s. He started his own magazine called Interview and several autobiographies on himself and pop art. At the age of 58, Andy Warhol passed away on the 21st of February 1987. Back then in the mid-1950s, magazines, movies, newspapers, and television were the focus of popular culture. It was like a rebelling statement for the young artists against abstract art. Officially, pop art was mentioned in the media for the first time by Lawrence Alloway in 1958 in the article The Arts and Mass Media. The article described, "A long time before pop art emerged, earlier forms of unofficial pop art already existed. It was just not considered an art form. It was existed in the forms of billboards and print advertisements. For example, as one can see below, is Bonjour, Monsieur Courbet, from 1855 by Gustave Courbet. This was a painting to portray the upper class and the lower class meeting in the middle, to represent the middle class. Although this is not thought of as the first pop art collage, Picasso made a collage out of a label and an ad, which definitely caused some impact to the movement. In the early 1950s, the young and new artists had to obey the rules of abstract art. However, they felt they wanted to rebel, as they were flowing with new, bright, colorful, and flashy ideas. The materialistic lifestyle that is today so common and acceptable was back then not tolerated. Why was pop art created? Because the new generation of artists in the 50s needed to rebel against the strictly set rules of art that back then were considered modern. The consequences of the creation of pop art were that a new culture arrived. The materialistic and superficial culture of the beautiful, famous, and the rich. With pop art also came a lot of craziness. Many people wanted to experiment with new things and break the rules. The biggest difference between the classic and first pop art artists such as Andy Warhol, Tom Wesselmann, and Roy Lichtenstein, and the modern and current ones such as Murakami, Russell Young, John Chamberlain, and Banksy lie in the focuses of the art. Nowadays, society appreciates originality far more than at the time when pop art was created. The art of pop art artists of today is focused on their main interests or passions, rather than what is popular or
1980 I started because my father influenced me to become an art dealer. And we had a lot of paintings at home on the walls. And one day he said if I would be interested in selling a couple of his paintings. And I got the paintings in my hand, and then I went around and I started my business, and I sold one of them. And I did pop art much later because pop art is unfortunately pretty expensive to deal with. And it needed another 20 years until 2000 when I started, maybe a little earlier, 1995. I bought a couple of early Warhol prints and Lichtenstein, very decorative big prints as well. So I started with prints in pop art. Yeah, one very important thing is that the prices have changed dramatically. Say you all know the dollar sign by Warhol. The little dollar signs in 1980 were selling for $2,000-3,000, and now they are like $400,000 to $600,000. That has changed. Actually, my favorite pop art artist is Claes Oldenburg, but he's very limited on the market. He didn't own. He was doing very strange things as well, very weird objects, and it was pretty difficult to understand because pop art actually is a very easy, understandable subject. You know, Warhol, for instance, made a big Coca-Cola bottle on black and white canvas. He made flowers, you know, like paper wall on the screen, on silk screen. And Claes Oldenburg is more sophisticated. You know, I like difficult subject. I like sophistication, smartness. You know, Andy Warhol, for instance, he came from the ad industry, so he was doing ads, magazines, and he was not expensive, so he was dealing with difficult clients, and they didn't pay him well, so he made very easy to understand topics. And this is why he started putting daily life objects on ads, and then later he realized what he does, these ads is like art, and then he started putting them on canvases, and this is how he created art. This is one full movement. There's not one more important or less important. This is one very important movement which is still alive, even if all these artists are mostly dead, you know. Roy Lichtenstein, he died a couple of years ago, but he still worked on pop art pictures in the early 21st century. And these big guys, they had a huge influence on art. And even today, you see Russell Young, you know, he does the Marilyn figures, Marilyn crying with diamond dust. Diamond dust was first used by Andy Warhol. He did a couple of pictures with diamond dust. So now there's a new artist generation, a new generation of artists. They still love pop art, and they work in the philosophy and in the sense of pop art. So this is a neo-pop art. Pop art. It's just, wow, it's there. It's popping into my eyes. Jumps into my eyes. Jasper Jones, definitely, with the American flag. Jasper Jones was really the first one with the flag. He was before war.
Roy Lichtenstein was a very famous American pop artist, born on the 27th of October 1923. In the 1960s, Lichtenstein led the new art movement along with Andy Warhol, Jasper Johns, and others. Roy Lichtenstein's work defined pop art better than the work of any other pop art artist at the time, with his comic strip as the main focus. His pieces were very strongly inspired by advertisements at the time and quite obviously comic books. Roy Lichtenstein described pop art as not American painting, but actual industrial painting. Lichtenstein studied studio courses as well as receiving a degree in fine arts at the Ohio State University. Unfortunately, his studies were interrupted at the age of 20 when he served the U.S. Army between the years of 1943 and 1946. Lichtenstein returned to his studies in Ohio and was then hired as an art instructor at Ohio State University, which position he kept for the following 10 years. In 1949, Roy Lichtenstein married Isabel Wilson and then moved to Cleveland. The Pasadena Art Museum in California held Lichtenstein's first retrospective exhibition in 1967. 2 years later, the Guggenheim exhibitioned Lichtenstein's work. Roy Lichtenstein incorporated the American pop culture and made it into high-end art. He took part in banishing the very heavy line between high and low-end art. Here are two of his favorite and most famous pop art pieces, Wham! From 1963 and Look Mickey from 1961, which probably is his most famous piece of all time. Jasper Johns is a very famous American pop artist, born on the 15th of May in 1920. He mainly creates prints and paintings. He currently lives on the island of St. Martin in Connecticut. Johns grew up in Augusta, Georgia with his grandparents due to his parents divorcing. From 1947 to 1948, he studied at the University of South Carolina for 3 semesters. In 1949, Johns moved to New York and studied at the Parsons School of Design. His studies were interrupted when he fought in the Korean War between 1952 and 1953. When Jasper Johns returned to New York in 1954, he met Robert Rauschenberg. They became lovers and their relationship lasted a long time. Johns was highly inspired and influenced by Merce Cunningham, who was a choreographer, and John Cage, who was a composer. They were both a gay couple. Johns and the two lovers together looked deeper into the contemporary art scene and generated their ideas about art. Jasper Johns was discovered in 1958 by gallerist Leo Castelli while visiting his studio. The gallery owner was very impressed by his work and offered him an exhibition at the Museum of Modern Art. It then became clear that at the time 28-year-old was going to have a heavy influence on the art world. Today, 3 decades later, Jasper Johns has sold paintings more expensive than any living artist ever has. The main art technique Jasper Johns used was printmaking. He said, "My experience of life is that it's very fragmented. Certain kinds of things happen, and in another place a different kind of things occur. I would like my work to have some type of vivid indication of those differences." His most famous painting is probably Flag, which was created in between the years of 1954 and 1955. My personal favorite, however, is False Start from 1959. Clees Oldenburg is an American sculptor who is famous for his large-in-size pieces which are reproductions of everyday objects. Oldenburg was born on the 28th of January 1929 in Stockholm, Sweden. He is the son of a Swedish diplomat who worked in several places in the United States. The Oldenburg family moved to Chicago in 1936 because his father was relocated there by his company, where the 7-year-old started school at the Latin School of Chicago. After graduating in 1946, Oldenburg visited the University of Yale and took courses in art history and literature for 4 years. After this, he returned home, where he continued his studies and took further classes to develop his skills at the Art Institute of Chicago. In the meantime, he worked as a reporter for the City News Bureau of Chicago, and then set up his personal studio. He became a citizen of the United States in 1953. Oldenburg decided to relocate to New York City, where he began working a part-time job in the Cooper Union Museum for the Arts of Decoration as an assistant of a library. He used this opportunity to build his knowledge on art and its history. While living in New York, Oldenburg befriended many rising artists such as Red Grooms, Alan Caprow, Robert Whitman, Lucas Samaras, George Segal, and Jim Dine. They all were struggling during the period of change of abstract expressionism. Everybody was going in the direction of art and interested in experiencing new things. The question that was being asked, what is art? This was the start of the pop art movement. Claes Oldenburg's very first exhibition was in 1958 in Red Groom's Gallery, including an assortment of his drawings. But his very first individual show was an exhibit of a couple of his drawings and his sculptures in 1959, which took place at the Judson Gallery. A major exhibition which Oldenburg was also included in was the New Realists, which was very defining in the pop art movement. Other major exhibitions of Oldenburg include the individual one at the Gallery of Sidney Janis and a retrospective exhibition at the Museum of Modern Art in 1969. Claes Oldenburg ironically saw himself not as an abstract artist as it may seem, which is usually the case with pop art artists. He took very common objects such as tea bags, slices of cakes, and lipsticks and made larger scale reproductions of them. The reproductions often had an opposite twist to them. For example, a cake would be made hard instead of soft, large when they were truly small, and so on. This became his style, reversing and bluffing the expectations of humans in gravity. Oldenburg was very much fascinated by Sigmund Freud, whose writing had an extreme impact on the artist's period of self-renovation between 1959 and 1961. The realist did experiment with several styles during his career. For example, drawing, painting, filmography, soft sculptures, and large sculptures out of scale. It was very important to Claes Oldenburg for his viewers to analyze his pieces in multiple ways and draw many conclusions when viewing his work. We have here the ray gun from 1959 and the soft drain pipe from 1967. Both of these pieces are major works of Claes Oldenburg. As one can see, his style varied a lot and he never really limited himself to one theme, he always used several. Oldenburg turned to many sources of inspiration, which all were part of shaping himself as an artist and his techniques and ways of thinking. His works often had a metaphorical meaning to them, representing symbols for him in his personal life. Exactly what type of symbols are not clear to us. That is what challenge he gave his viewers, to interpret his pieces in their eyes and think of what they could have meant to him. Today, pop art is mostly connected with the works of the pop art artists of the 1960s in New York. For example, Andy Warhol, Claes Oldenburg, James Rosenquist, and Roy Lichtenstein. The pop art artists created pieces that portrayed popular culture, which put together the worlds of high and low art culture. One of pop art's main characteristics was that art could take ideas from anywhere, which made pop art what it was then. Pop art artists came after abstract artists, so the so-called abstract expressionists were rumored to have been very melancholic and desperate for traumatic subjects to be inspired by. The pop artists, however, searched for disturbing subjects and immortality in the media and of all popular image. After the Second World War, there was an immense manufacturing and consumer boom. Pop artists enjoyed this very much and drew several of their influences from this change. Most pop artists started their pop art careers by working in advertisement or commercials. For example, Andy Warhol as a very successful graphic designer, or James Rosenquist, who started off his career by painting billboards. Many pop artists had a past in the commercial art world, which educated them on mass culture as well as popular culture and how high art fit into these.